Go ahead, Diane.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Diane Rodriguez-Rand, and I'm a member of Kenilworth Union Church and also a member of the church's Racial Justice Committee. I'm happy to host this evening's gathering. I'm here because I personally care deeply about how inequities affect people of color in general, and more specifically, because I am also interested in looking for real solutions that people are involved in our city. And I'm here to learn more. So one of the things that I would love to do as we get to know each other as in this room for 1 hour is if you could put in the chat why it is that you have joined us this evening. And if you are a member of Kenilworth Union Church, that's great. We're glad to have you. If you are a friend of a member or you heard about this, we would love to have you put that in the chat as well. But welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. So while you do that, I'm going to just go ahead and continue. 4 Chicago West Side nonprofits have formed a coalition called Justice Rising Project 77 in hopes of strengthening public safety through free legal aid and wraparound social services for children and young adults up to age 24. So Kenilworth Union, through our outreach program, supports Breakthrough, one of these 4 nonprofits. And tonight, we are happy to bring together Project 77 leaders Cliff Nellis, founder of Lawndale Christian Legal Services, and Yolanda Fields, executive director of Breakthrough, to share with us why they formed the coalition and what it plans to accomplish. So let me give you a brief agenda for the evening. I'm first going to share with you a video that Yolanda has shared with us that gives you a sense of the neighborhood where Breakthrough is located and where this work is being done on the west side of Chicago. And then I'm going to introduce both Cliff and Yolanda more formally and allow them to introduce themselves. And then we're going to allow them each about 10-12 minutes to talk a little bit about the coalition, what they're doing, what the purpose is, the problem that they're trying to solve. And then after about 30 minutes, we're going to open it up to questions and answers. And I also wanted to mention that if at any point during our discussion, you should have a question, please just go ahead and put it in the chat, and I will try and monitor those and make sure that all of our questions are getting answered. So if for some reason there's a question and we're still going in discussions because we've only got an hour, if there's a question that we haven't answered, I'm also going to put my own email in the chat, and you can send your question to me if you would like to pursue it, and I will ask Cliff and Yolanda to help us answer those questions. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and share with you, I think I am, there we go, a little bit about the west side of Chicago.
Chicago, we're one city made up of 77 neighborhoods. And while the city is our home and we love it, the unfortunate truth is this.
The neighborhood you live in is a huge factor in the types of jobs that you have available to you, education, transportation, life expectancy, and even the daily struggles you face.
Our neighborhood, East Garfield Park, is just 4 miles west of downtown Chicago. And although we're a beautiful community filled with 20,000 residents who are resilient and full of hope, we are still facing a mountain of challenges brought on by systems of racial injustice that have marginalized and oppressed residents within our community and the way we experience everyday life. These effects are real and long-lasting. Here are just a few.
The median household income here in East Garfield Park is $21,000, while 2 L stops away in the West Loop, it's $102,000.
18% of our neighbors are unemployed. Just a 20-minute drive up the street to Lincoln Park, that rate drops to 4%.
The life expectancy of a Chicagoan drops from 82 years old for those living downtown to 68 in our community. That's a 14-year difference, just 2 neighborhoods away.
While a public high school in Chicago's Gold Coast boasts a graduation rate of 96%, just take a 17-minute bus ride to East Garfield Park, where the students, teachers, and administration are up against so much, and see that rate fall to 50%.
Most of us are aware of historic redlining, but a 2020 study reveals a version of modern day redlining. Minorities pay between 3 and 5% more in fees than similarly qualified whites when obtaining a loan from that same white broker. This same study also showed that in Chicago's 77 communities, lenders invested more in one white community than all of the Black neighborhoods combined. Rising unemployment rates, a decline in the median household income, on top of discriminatory lending practices, makes home ownership nearly impossible within our community. Well, let me be clear. That makes home ownership nearly impossible for the current residents within our community.
For us and our neighbors, these inequities are hard to overcome. But overcoming is exactly what is happening here at Breakthrough.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. Not that I'm not hopeful and I don't want to share all the hopeful things that are happening, but we have a specific hopeful thing that's happening in the west side of Chicago, and I want to be sure that we have time to share that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to Cliff. Do you want to go first and introduce yourself? And tell us a little bit about the organization that you started, and then we'll have Yolanda do the same.
Sure. Well, good evening, everybody. Diane, thank you for setting this up and hosting us tonight. I'm honored to be partnering with Yolanda and Breakthrough. As I've said in a number of meetings and a number of settings, we really have the highest respect for the work that Breakthrough is doing in East Garfield Park. And quite frankly, that video just affirmed once again the great work you all are doing. I wish we had a similar video for North Lawndale, because sadly the story would be very similar. For those that don't know, I'm assuming most people do know, but North Lawndale is literally the community just south of East Garfield Park. So we are quite literally neighbors in that 77 neighborhoods of Chicago. So 12 years ago, we started the Lawndale Christian Legal Center here in North Lawndale. And I'm proud to say it was founded by a board of directors, 100% of whom were residents of North Lawndale. Our bylaws require that 51% of our board of directors will always be residents of North Lawndale. And I myself moved into North Lawndale in 2009. So at the time, 100% of the founding board and staff were residents of North Lawndale. I did not grow up in North Lawndale. I grew up in a northwest suburb of Chicago called Lake Zurich, if anybody's familiar with it. And quite frankly, I was rather ignorant, is the only word that's coming to mind tonight, of racial inequities in our society. I grew up in a bubble, and I did not realize that bubble until I moved into North Lawndale, and that was a good 7 years after I had become a Christian. So just briefly about myself and the Legal Center, I was an atheist when I went off to college. I had a sort of a loose faith growing up that was supported mostly by my grandmother. And when I went off to college, I majored in philosophy. I had abandoned any notion of faith or religion that I had in my upbringing. And I was an atheist for a good 10 plus years through college, law school. I clerked for a federal judge out in Denver, Colorado. I graduated from the University of Chicago Law School in 2000. And my plan was really to make a lot of money. I mean, I had a number of offers from a number of large law firms. And before I went to go work for a big firm, I decided to do a cross-country bicycle trip from Denver, Colorado to San Diego, California to Miami, Florida, pedal bicycle with a Bible. And it was a remarkable experience. I read the Bible actually for the first time. It was largely because my older brother had become a Christian, was very annoying, and was constantly pestering me about Jesus. And I wanted him to shut up. And so I thought I'd read it myself and tell him why he was wrong. And turns out I had a humbling experience and thought that, maybe I'm wrong. So I felt called to ministry on this bicycle trip. I biked across a guard shack for a boys correctional facility, had a very passing conversation, which would think is maybe unremarkable in many respects, but it is the conversation that I believe has led me to moving into North Lawndale and starting the legal center. In short, the guard at this boys correctional facility was in Springer, New Mexico. He told me, without me soliciting this from him, I was actually asking for directions. He told me that the young people in his facility have no hope, that they come in at 13, they come back at 14, 15, and spend the rest of their life in adult prison. And of course, I was this new Christian where I always joked that the clouds were parting and angels were singing everywhere. And I was like, everybody has hope. And so I basically took the rest of that bicycle trip praying and saying, God, what can I do? Sort of send me, use me, whatever. And I had no idea I'd start a legal center. I thought I was going to leave the practice of law. I went into seminary school, worked my way through seminary school as a youth pastor, came across Lawndale Community Church in 2005. And then between 2005 and 2009, I started to develop relationships with the church because I was very impressed with its outreach to the community. It started a number of nonprofits, very similar to Breakthrough, in its values and its approach and its focus. And so I was moved, and I met the doctors that started the health center, and they formed a sort of a holistic practice of medicine. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. And obviously I moved in 2009, and we started the legal center with a broad vision to meet the legal and social needs of young people under 25 in North Lawndale. And we started with really no intention, no vision for transforming the criminal justice system. It was serving one kid at a time and saying, you know what, we learned over the years that they had pretty serious legal needs and pretty serious social needs. And we wanted to help one kid at a time. That out of a sort of a church base, we were separate 501c3, of course, but we were birthed out of Lawndale Community Church. I would say about 7 years down the road, so about 5 years ago, we started to realize that what we were developing has some major implications on our criminal justice system. And that the model of what we call holistic community-based defense brought into really holistic community-based restorative justice practices, where we focused on healing harm in our community and meeting the social needs of young people under 25 as an alternative to what our current system has done and is doing and has been doing for decades and centuries, which is just to police, to prosecute and incarcerate predominantly Black and Latino communities. And the presence of the criminal justice system in North Lawndale and in East Garfield Park is palpable. It's really, it's something that I still am not used to. The number of police, the amount of contact, the degrading tone in which so many of our system players, from police to judges to prosecutors to sheriffs, the way they speak to our community, it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem. It's been very jarring. So we, about 4 or 5 years ago, we decided that we think that this way of doing things from the ground up, from a community level, that's holistic, community-led, restorative justice, which is healing harm and meeting social needs instead of this sort of barbaric permanent criminal records and unnecessary incarceration, was really exponentially better than what we're currently doing. And we set our sails to expand this and really transform the criminal justice system across the entire county, Cook County. And that's what gave rise to Justice Rising and Project 77. And I'll land the plane here and turn it over to Diane or Yolanda. But we reached out to Breakthrough and the other two organizations, Build in Austin and New Life Centers in Little Village, because we've known Breakthrough and Yolanda and her team for the 12 years that we've been a legal center, likewise with Build and New Life Centers. And we know that they shared some of our really important core values. They shared the vision around transforming the criminal justice system. They understood the inequities of the criminal justice system, the impact it's having on young people and their families in East Garfield Park. They hire from the neighborhood, they're in the neighborhood, they're geographically focused, and they have a boatload of social services that are geared towards East Garfield Park youth and families, many of whom are already justice involved and street involved. And so the proposal was that we would add a lawyer and a case manager in just this first year of an initial partnership. The goal, of course, is to scale it, but that we would add a lawyer and a case manager at Breakthrough to be on site, starting off part-time, but working towards full-time until a full caseload is developed, so that we could now start to integrate Breakthrough's social services with our legal services and vice versa, our legal services with Breakthrough's social services. But we were very intentional in all the meetings I had with Yolanda and Bill and Damien and now the entire staff. We really have always been focused on the ultimate vision of really transforming the criminal justice system from the ground up and building out this community-led holistic restorative justice model that heals harm and meets social needs. So that's sort of the backdrop of LCLC and how we came in partnership with Yolanda and Breakthrough. I hope I didn't go too long, Diana. You can always cut me off. I got thick skin. So if you're like, Cliff, just stop talking.
Yeah, Cliff, I wouldn't dream of it. But that's a perfect place to segue into Yolanda, and you can tell us a little bit about what the Breakthrough does and the work that you do there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Diane, and to each of you. I really applaud Kenilworth. Not only have you been wonderful partners, but I think it's amazing that you would take the opportunity to dive just a little deeper into the headlines, right? The things that we're talking about right now really are posted as headlines almost every day of our lives. We travel on planes now, and you sit next to people and they say, well, where are you from? And the minute you say Chicago, the attention is turned to violence. And so I am extremely privileged right now to be serving as executive director at Breakthrough, 6 whole months in the role, and I am alive to tell it. God has been extremely gracious. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to lead during a pandemic. And in our neighborhood, it is a double pandemic. Both COVID and violence is having a similar effect on our community. And so it's just tough right now. But God has made provision, and we are just really thankful that He also, with provision, has given us strategy. So many of you may already know that Breakthrough will soon next year celebrate 30 years of ministry and service to those who are living on the margins. The way that we describe our work has evolved. There was a time when we talked about how we served the adult population and the youth population. We've started to think about the work that we do in 5 areas. And those areas really are the areas where we see the most inequities in our community. So youth and education, violence prevention, housing, health and wellness, and then economic opportunity, which is sort of the lead way for the video that you just saw. And then our last piece really is spiritual formation, which really undergirds everything that we do. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time, because we don't have time for me to talk about all of the things that we're doing in youth and education or housing. You should know that from preschool education to post-secondary, Breakthrough has programs that are really empowering young people from academic to STEAM to sports. In housing, we are serving both families and individuals. And so 42 units of housing for individuals that is scattered, and then 11 units of family housing in addition to the 2 shelters, gender specific, men and women that house 30 individuals. And then our violence prevention program and economic opportunity, really those development areas are newer for Breakthrough. I'll talk about just our economic development, community development piece for a few minutes, and then I'll spend the majority of my little 5 minutes really just talking about our violence prevention. So the video really gives you a good indication of the needs that exist. You didn't get to the hopeful part, so you don't get an opportunity to really see how resilient and beautiful the people of Garfield Park are and how determined they are to really see their lives changed. So we realized that there were some unintended impact associated with our work. So Breakthrough really has been in the community. And so when Cliff says that their leadership team lives in the community and is deeply rooted, so is Breakthrough. So Arloa, our founder, moved to Breakthrough, moved as a result of her work with Breakthrough to Garfield Park almost 20 years ago. And then all of our other executive leadership team members are also rooted in Garfield Park or surrounding communities. And so over the 20 years, we have been extremely faithful to the mission of really partnering with people to create this thriving community. And the unintended result from that is gentrification. And so we've recognized that the cost to live in Garfield Park has increased. The amount of a home has almost doubled, and it has become harder for those what we consider legacy residents to remain. And for those who are interested in home ownership, it's become almost impossible. And so as we thought about those things and our part in it, we recognized that we needed to expand our workforce development and career readiness to include programs that not only inspired people to work and provided them with the training and skills that they needed, but we needed to do more. We needed to have conversations, strategic conversations about budgeting, empowering conversations about finances. We needed to talk about credit scores, how to purchase homes, provide the right assistance for doing so and connecting them to the resources. For our homeowners who were there, for our homeowners who were there and needed opportunities to, I'm not sure what's going on with I'm sorry. We knew that those homeowners needed opportunities to really fix up their home and be really connected to those resources that the city already provides. And so with our Community Economic Development Center, we wanted to do those things and more. So the video talks a little bit more about those efforts and just the hope that we have around it. 5 years ago, we were beginning this strategic plan. As a part of that strategic plan, we heard from our neighborhood that there were several things that they were concerned about. What was at the top of that list was safety. And so around the time that we were praying and trying to figure out how we might respond to what our community really wanted us to do, we had a few people who were putting together another coalition who said, hey, we're interested in putting together a group of individuals who will address violence. So for the last 5 years, Breakthrough has been intimately involved with violence prevention. We do that with a comprehensive strategy that includes street outreach, which means that we have a group of outreach professionals who go out and respond to the scene of a crime in real time. We we have a collaborative partnership that is not perfect, but allows us to work well with our 11th District Police commanders and leaders. So we are notified of those incidents as they occur. We respond with the hope of one, there is sometimes a chaotic scene. We want to help create peace and civility around those scenes. But we also want to understand what may have prompted the violence so that we can reduce retaliation. The second part of that strategy involves case management. For those that we meet on the scene or during our canvassing who may be victims of violence or even perpetrators or vulnerable to violence, we want to help them exit that life. And so we want to provide comprehensive wraparound supports that include goal setting, connection to resources, GED programs, all of the things that you can imagine that would be necessary to help someone transition out of that life. The third part of the strategy really is all about our community and reclaiming safe spaces. And so prior to COVID, every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we would go to parks, to basketball courts, to those places for the most part that had been abandoned. We would create large-scale events. And when I say large, I mean really large, like a grill so big that we need a tow truck to bring it to the scene. And so we hitch it to the back of our van and we show up. We host activities from the middle of the afternoon all the way through the evening time. The purpose there is to reclaim those spaces, create community, serve food, so meeting a tangible need, but also offer resources. And so during COVID, we've had to adapt some. The crowds are not as large, but we've been able to provide COVID testing and vaccinations and to distribute PPE and all of the information that would be needed to persuade an at-risk community into safety protocols and vaccination. The last part of the strategy really is victim services. And so this is a piece that we added 2 years ago. Victim services allows us, when we connect with victims, either to connect with them at the hospital or their close family or relatives who are on the scene for the sole purpose of being able to provide additional support. So Illinois has a robust victims service program. We want to connect them to those resources. We want to understand the needs of the family. And more importantly, we want to be able to connect with siblings and other family members who may also be vulnerable for violence. And so it's that work that created an opportunity for Justice Rising. We're excited to work with Lawndale Christian Legal Center because we understand that they understand intimately the needs of our community, particularly young people. So having an attorney on site in our facility once a week with a case manager allows us to create what was missing from the wraparound services. So we literally can help people with education. We can connect them for housing. We can give them food and clothing, and we can support them through a robust network of volunteers. We are even able to facilitate restorative circles of healing for the families that may be involved. But for our young people who were showing up already justice involved or found themselves in spaces where they needed legal assistance, and not just the kind of legal assistance where they would be a number, but the kind of legal assistance that would allow someone to really walk with them, who understood the law and also understood them and the needs that they have. And that is what Lawndale Christian Legal Center has been doing for a long time. And so we are hopeful that this partnership will reduce recidivism in jail, that it would provide quality services for those who need it the most, and that for us at Breakthrough, that it would allow us to have an additional resource for the most vulnerable young people. And so when we talk about who we serve right now through our violence prevention program, we started out saying we were only going to serve those 18 and up. After about 3 years of the violence prevention work, we had a situation where one of our staff was, there was an attempted carjacking by a 14-year-old. And we knew at that point that we needed to be able to respond to the needs of our young people, no matter what their age. And so the idea that Cliff and his team will be able to serve the youngest of the most vulnerable young people in our neighborhood is hopeful. And so I think my time is up almost perfectly, Diane. Did I do good?
Oh, you did great,
Thank you.
Yolanda. Thank you. I don't know
I'll
about
stop
all of
there.
you on this call, but I have 1,000 questions now that I've heard just a little bit of what they're doing. So I'm going to ask you to, first off, turn on your video if you're able, and in your reactions section, there's an area there where you can raise your hand. And so if you can raise your hand, I will, or if you can't find that, just raise your hand and I will call on you to ask questions of both Cliff and Yolanda. And I can see, Scott, that you are already there. So go ahead.
All right. So I will, I'll start. First of all, Yolanda, I know Bill Curry, have been acquainted with Bill for a long time. So when you see him, please tell him hello for me. This is kind of a question both for Yolanda and for you, Cliff. Last year in one of these sessions, we had a presentation by the Bail Project, right? Focusing on maybe a slightly different approach to trying to address some of the similar issues in terms of individuals being arrested and incarcerated for long periods of time, just awaiting trial. The question I have is there any coordination or collaboration with the Bail Project, since there's definitely some overlap between the individuals that are being served by all three organizations?
I can jump in, Yolanda, on that one. So yes, we're very familiar with the Bail Project. Matthew McFarland, well, the founder, Robin Steinberg, is someone, if you all don't know, founded the Bronx Defenders in New York. And it is the closest thing to what we do here at the Legal Center. It's not quite the same thing. Though Robin was so successful in the 25 years that the Bronx Defenders has been in existence, it is now the public defender provider for the entire borough of the Bronx. So they are now the contracted public defender. I'm not sure if everybody knows that, but Robin Steinberg started that. Then out of that was the Bronx Community Bail Fund, the goal of which was basically to ensure that people were not incarcerated based upon their wealth. The sole determination of course, cash bail is just whether or not somebody has money to post bond. It has nothing to do with guilt or innocence. In fact, everybody's presumed, of course, to be innocent pending trial. And it's really just punishment for those who have no resources. It really is not even a very good, it's not related at all to public safety or a threat to the community, nor is the law designed to be so. So when the Bronx Community Fund expanded then to become the Bail Project, and they started their Chicago office, I believe about 2-3 years ago, we've been in very close partnership with them, such that we had, for those that don't know, they post people's bonds pending trial. We were a priority partner because of our holistic social support. They knew that those who they were posting bond for would get a lot of resources for them in our community. And so we actually had a very close relationship with the Bail Project. Now, of course, this last year, quite to their credit, but also a lot of local community organizing that was actually in place even prior to the Bail Project coming. I think it's important to give some acknowledgement, respect to the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and a lot of other people, but they were doing very similar work, and we had a very close partnership with them as well, where they were posting bond for our clients as well, because of course, again, we had a lot of social support, so there was perceived to be a lower risk bond posting. So the long story short there is now, of course, they've ended cash bail, which is something to be proud of in Illinois, and that goes in effect January 1. It's sort of a progression of this new law, and we are certainly we're a part of supporting that legislation, and will be supportive and part of, in some capacity, the second follow-up progression of that work, which is now that the cash bail has ended, they're designing a community release with support centers to support people who now will be getting an I bond, who otherwise would have had a D bond, which is basically an I bond is something, it's a personal recognizance. You don't have to pay any money. A D bond, you have to pay 10% of whatever it is. So if it's a $50,000 D bond, you have to post $5,000 to be free. There's going to be a lot more I bonds coming January 1. And so they are designing it with the Cook County, a lot of community centers for supporting those who are going to be pending trial. And we are familiar with that work. We hope we will be partnering with them in some form or fashion. We may be very closely partnering with them, but we'll see as there's some ongoing discussions that I really can't go into right now. But I would just say that we're very familiar. We will be partnering for sure in some way. To what extent, I think we'll know in the next month. Hopefully that answered your question, Scott.
Sure. Yeah, thanks.
Yolanda, I don't know if you want to add anything to the bail project and that. Okay.
Yeah, we were very fortunate, Cliff, to have Robin join us last year. Other questions? I don't know if you either raise your physical hand or raise your or raise your virtual hand. Susan, do you want to go ahead?
So thank you so much, Cliff and Yolanda, for your service and courage. It's really impressive and inspiring. I'm not quite sure how to ask my question, so I'll just throw it all out there. I sense that there's people in our communities, outside of the communities that you're involved with, that become more anesthetized to what's happening in those communities by two things. One is weekly news reports of numbers of shootings. There's 60 this weekend with this many fatalities. There's 70, there's this. And then the preponderance of gangs. And so it sort of, again, dehumanizes what's going on, and so how do you help us be more understanding of what's happening in those communities, particularly as it relates to the gang violence, and efforts underway to make a difference on that front? And then it's interesting, this justice involvement you talk about, Cliff, how that path works with regard to gang members and on that front. So
Yeah,
not very articulate, but maybe you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yep, absolutely do, Susan. And thank you for just allowing us the opportunity to address that, because that is always the elephant in the room. And so I start by first saying that we all know that Chicago is made up of 77 neighborhoods. The violence that occurs that generally makes the headlines is limited to about 15 to 18 of those neighborhoods. The actual homicides generally happen in 7 to 10 of those neighborhoods. And within those neighborhoods, within a 12 to 14 block radius, do we see most of the homicides. And so this idea that it's widespread and is, occurring just isn't the truth. I think the other thing, so some of it is about the narrative that we receive when we are on the ground doing the work. We recognize that there is more to the violence than gangs, street organizations. So we started this session around economics because it really is economics that drives a lot of the violence. So there are a couple things I can tell you that I've learned. One is the violence looks different. The reasons for the violence looks different in every neighborhood. So what drives the South Side violence is a little different than what drives the West Side violence. So on the West Side, we talk about an open air drug market. And so that literally means when we're talking about street organizations, we're not talking about organizations that have some hierarchy, where there's one person or two people at the top and all of the foot soldiers. No, it literally is block by block, and it is about selling drugs on those blocks. And when those blocks are infiltrated or there is an attempt to take over, that is when we see the largest amount of violence. The second thing I would say that we've learned during the pandemic is what is driving a lot of the violence on the West Side really is conflict that is being aired through social media. So literally on our outreach team, we have someone who monitors all of the social media platforms to try and understand what those personal conflicts are about and how we might be able to mediate it. And then lastly, I would say there was a report that was released, and before we get off, I'll see if I can find the link, but it really was data collected by the Chicago Police Department that said 45% of the homicides in Chicago are attributed to gangs. Less than 7% of non-fatal shootings in Chicago are attributed to gangs. So this idea that gangs are driving, all of the violence really is a narrative that we have to investigate. So I'll stop, and I'm sure Cliff has something to add to that.
Yeah, I would. I also thank you for the question, because I think it is a tough one and it's a difficult one, but it's an important conversation to have. And nothing I would say about this is something that I would have understood 13 years ago. And so I won't lie that sometimes I feel it's almost impossible for and obviously I'm dress the elephant in our room right now. We're obviously addressing a predominantly white and affluent crowd here tonight, and that's predominantly where I grew up, is with a predominantly white and affluent crowd as well. And I just can't emphasize enough how little we actually understand. Over the last 13 years of really walking very closely with a lot of young people, heavily involved in the streets, making ends meet through primarily selling drugs, protecting that business through whatever means necessary, which can often include carrying weapons, most of the time for personal protection and self-defense, not because of some desire to act on violently towards somebody. But what I can share is that, it's heartbreaking because our kids are kids, and it's very understandable. I mean, it's very understandable for, I would say, 99% of the kids that I've come very, very close to and been, known them and their family now for a long time. And, godfather to some of our kids, and very close to their families, their neighbors, their fellow churchgoers. The children are, I think just pause on the fact that I just said children. Children are getting involved in selling drugs on the streets. Most of our kids at 8 to 12 years old, they have some version of a story where, their family was evicted. They came home to their belongings scattered on the street. They struggled to pay rent, to food, overcrowded housing. I've been in apartments, 10 people, in a 2-bedroom, where you've got blankets on the floor, mattresses all around, a closet that's claimed to be a bedroom for a child that barely fits a mattress, you know, real poverty. And in that environment, you know, you're going to do what you got to do to eat, to literally keep a roof over your head. And it's very understandable. And I think it says a lot about the conditions of our society, that the economic opportunities that are more prevalently available to too many of our young people in North Lawndale and East Garfield Park is the drug trade, instead of after school programs and internships and employment opportunities that, although are you know, just a few miles away, they feel like they may as well be on another planet. It's heartbreaking. It's truly heartbreaking. But I share that because you know, it's tough to talk about, because I don't think people quite frankly understand what I say when I say this. But, you know, I've had young people live with me. I've had young people stay in my house, come over and visit, and they'll tell me that they're carrying a gun because they had to walk from their house to mine. And although that might sound alarming to most people, I don't kick them out of my house. I don't call the police. I don't even ask them to leave, nor do I ask them to put the gun away. I understand that that's part of the life that they're living, and some of the decisions they make are very rational. And I've had real heart-to-heart conversations and said, you know, that's a felony. You know, it's obviously not in your best interest to carry a gun. But then they'll come back at me and say, well, it's a felony, it's for my life. What would I pick? I'm like, well, that's a very good point. Would I pick my life, or would I pick a felony? And I'd rather them grow up in a way where that's not the options, you know, that there's more options than that. And that's not a perceived reality. That's partly reality for some of our kids. It's not, some of it's perceived, some of there's opportunities that exist in the community, and to get out of the community, to be exposed to other things that they have available to them that they're not aware of potentially, or maybe not taking advantage of right now. But it is literally a reality, and too many of our kids have grown up in this. It's what they've known since they're very young. But I also think what Yolanda said is very important to keep in mind. Although it is an alarmingly high, and I would say unacceptably high number of young people growing up in that environment and under those circumstances, while understandable, while heartbreaking, while very, I don't look at them as thugs or as criminals. They're not bad kids, and I understand that that's not easy to understand if they're shooting somebody or robbing or stealing, but they're not bad kids. But it's very important to understand that it is still a minority in the community. It's not everybody. And when you look at systems and society at large, there is not a differentiation in treatment between Pastor Joe, who's my board president and lives a block down from me and is the associate pastor at Lawndale Community Church, or Pastor Darren, or my neighbor, and the kids on the street. They get treated very similarly. If Pastor Joe were here, he would tell you about times that police interacted with him, and I've seen it. So, you know, it is a problem. Obviously, violence is an issue. And I think the kids that are caught in it are caught in it. And I think the work that we do in our communities has a far greater degree of chance of breaking that cycle of poverty, breaking that cycle of violence, breaking the cycle of crime or incarceration, far more. When I say far more, I mean, like, it's almost ignorant to even have the conversation, quite honestly, as to whether or not that's better than policing, prosecuting, and incarcerating our kids. That's what we've always done. That's what we've done to get where we are today. And as those news reports come out, Susan, I think was one that asked those questions, you know, we need to stand strong and say that the results that we see today is because of the policies that we've had for so long, because our knee-jerk reaction is to incarcerate, to police, more courts, more jails. You know, that has failed. And I don't feel like anybody with any intelligence or integrity You're either lacking intelligence or you're lacking integrity to say that it has not failed. It has failed. It is not working. I don't know anybody who could argue it is. You got 75% of people in 3 years return to the prison after being in it. What is that doing for anybody? You know, permanent felony records for 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20 for the rest of their life. It's difficult to get a job at McDonald's. What is that? We took a bad situation, admittedly it's bad, and we made it worse. We made it exponentially worse. And that's on us. That's on us as a society. That's the system. That's the public service and elected officials, judges and lawyers and police officers that's on us. That's our response to this. And, you know, a holistic, a community-based, restorative justice, resources in the nation. And we're spending billions, by the way, billions with a B annually, locally. I'm not talking about across the nation. Across the nation, it's upwards of 300 billion in just direct costs. One study, 1.2 trillion if you include indirect costs. But just locally in Chicago, police budget is 1.7 billion. You have the state's attorney, the public defender, the sheriff, the judiciary, the clerk's office, the probation, the parole, the county jail, the state jail, do all that all over again on the federal police, federal courts, federal prisons, federal parole, federal probation, billions every year, annually. And that's what everybody in Chicago and Cook County and Illinois is paying for, billions. I don't think, Yolanda, what could we do? What could we do with billions? It's absurd to even compare what we could do with billions to what is currently being done with billions. So, we have to fight that narrative. We have to say enough is enough. No more law enforcement driven mentality. No more lock them up. No more law and order. We're not saying no accountability. Restorative justice is, there's accountability, there's healing, there's restoration, there's actual true accountability, quite frankly. In our current system, there's none. So I could go off forever and I'm going to stop. But that's what I would add.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Cliff. And I think we had a question there from the Peepgrass family. And I know you're not John Peepgrass, so I'm but you have your mute button on. So if you want to turn your sound down for us. It's at the bottom left corner.
Are you unmuted?
There you go.
You all right?
Okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to this.
No
Anyway,
worries.
I think Cliff really said it so well, and I would add to what he said that the bottom line is poverty. Young girls having babies in poverty and growing up in poverty, and there only being one person in the family, and it just gets it's I don't know. It's poverty. It's poverty. And I also wanted to say that in my curiosity about gangs, how do kids get into gangs? Why do they get into gangs? I read this years ago called Gang Leader for a Day, and it really helped me to understand exactly what Cliff was saying about how and why kids get into gangs. They want to belong somewhere. They want to be part of something. They want power. They want something better than what they have in the home. And I don't know, that's just my opinion, but this is an extraordinary program that you have, and I really appreciate what's happening. It's wonderful. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Could you share with us, both Cliff and Yolanda, a little bit about how Project 77 physically works? What happens when you are, and I'm learning this new terminology tonight called justice involved. What happens when you are justice involved? share with us an anecdote and walk us through the process in which a young person comes to you.
Well, if Yolanda, you want me to go or you want to go?
No, you can start.
Okay. Well, we just initially started, right? So our lawyer and case managers, they're just 1 day a week. I think we do have our first clients though through they were now co-serving in East Garfield Park together. But one thing to know that is, I wouldn't say limiting, but it is part of the process in how they come into contact with us today. And it is very limited to this first year, because one of the things that we started doing at the Legal Center a couple of years ago is designing the first randomized controlled trial evaluation in partnership with the local public defender's office. It's the first of its kind across the country. And one of the things I'm very passionate about and believe really we do need to do is to really evaluate impact and make sure that we aren't doing harm, but that we are doing good, right? And that's another way of saying data-driven decision making. I don't like saying data because our kids aren't data, but it's information and understanding what are the outcomes. And one of the things that we're very passionate about at LCLC is that public defense has gone under the radar for far too long. There is not enough attention placed on it. There's not enough value given to it. And we usually, myself included, be the first one to say, oh, they have huge caseloads. They have 150 to 350 clients. They can't possibly provide good representation to so many people. But we got to stop making that excuse, because at the end of the day, I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Just Mercy and read the book and know the story of Walter McMillan. And Brian Stevenson is an amazing lawyer. He is truly a very skilled and gifted attorney. And what he's done in the Supreme Court of the United States is amazing. But having said that, anybody that doesn't even have a law degree could have represented Walter McMillan and proven his innocence within weeks of his arrest. Think of how, you may not know this, but it's very difficult to resurrect a case 10, 15 years down the road after a jury has found you guilty. It's very difficult. In fact, without some real compelling evidence that wasn't provided to the original jury or judge that heard the trial, you're not going to get a second bite at the apple. It's a sacred constitutional principle in our country that, we trust our juries. And so just to even that you can get a second bite means something went wrong. And if you think about some of the physical evidence they were able to get for Walter McMillan's innocence, I think it was 15, 20 years down after the actual crime occurred. Imagine what a competent lawyer could have done within weeks and months of his arrest. The number of exculpatory witnesses and documents that could have been generated to prevent the injustice from happening in the first place. Now, I'm not so stupid to say that, or naive maybe that, that racism might have still convicted him, but I think it would have been far harder than had competent representation been provided. And so I share that because the evaluation that we're leading right now is really an evaluation of our local public defender's office. Sharon Mitchell's our now current public defender. The public defender before them, Amy Campanelli, and she's now at the Legal Center. She works here at LCLC. She and I designed this actually when she was the public defender the last 6 years. And I've met with Sharon and his team now, and we're looking forward to partnering together. We don't want to be against our public defenders. We want to work with them. But it's not necessarily that we're better lawyers. We have a better model. When you're holistic, when you're community-based, you get familiar with a geography, which is another way of saying crime scenes. These intersections. I know North Lawndale. I can easily photograph many crime scenes. I have a lot greater credibility with local witnesses who will talk to me and help me represent my client. And same with all the other lawyers we have at LCLC.
Cliff, I love to hear that, but I'm going to interject in just a second because we literally have 1 minute left. And Yolanda, I would love it if you could share with us, actually both Cliff and Yolanda, if you would put your emails into the chat, I would very much appreciate that. But then in 1 minute, Yolanda, can you tell us on behalf of Project 77, what can the people in the room do to help?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is be prayerful and be intentional in prayer. One of the things we don't talk about is that victims and perpetrators are often the same. So that is one thing, is to be in prayer for those of us who are doing the work and for all of those who are involved. The second thing I would say is be interrogators, that we have to interrogate what we hear and what we see, whether we're reading it in a credible newspaper or hearing it from another source that we consider credible, that we would always interrogate. And then lastly, I would say that we could always use tangible support, whether that is financial or Diane knows we could always use volunteers, people who have skills in a variety of areas. David knows this. He's on the line, that we need people who have expertise that can help contribute and help us move the mission forward.
Yeah, thank you. Well, folks, it is 8 o'clock and I am so grateful for all of your time. I hope that you have learned quite a bit as I have, and I thank you for joining us this evening. I'm putting my information into the chat. And if you should have further questions and want to get a hold of me to get a hold of either Cliff or Yolanda, I'm happy to do that as well. Have a great evening and we'll see you soon.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you for hosting us tonight.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.